There is this very specific, undeniable realization that hits right around the time you turn 40. I mean, you go out for a late dinner, maybe stay up just a couple of hours past your normal bedtime, and the next day you feel like you have been hit by a truck.
That happens to a lot of people. It is a very universal feeling.
Right. Or you notice that those 3 or 4 pounds you put on, the ones that used to simply vanish after 2 careful weeks of eating well, they suddenly decide they're going to stick around for 2 careful months. You aren't imagining it. Welcome to TalkKast. Because there is this weird cultural myth that turning 40 means your body just gives up on you overnight, and we really need to get to the bottom of that.
We do, because it is that exact moment when the theoretical concept of getting older stops being just an idea and starts feeling incredibly personal. A lot of what becomes clearer in your 40s often starts showing up earlier, and we actually touched on some of that in What Happens to Your Body at 30.
That's a great point. The seeds are planted early.
Exactly. But 40 is not a cliff. It is just a turning point. What makes this decade so fascinating is that it is the exact point where your biology and your lifestyle begin speaking at the exact same volume. I mean, when you are 25, your body is remarkably forgiving. It actively hides the cost of your bad habits.
Wait, I want to stop you right there because that is a massive reality check. At 25, the body hides the cost. But at 40, it starts sending you the receipts.
That is exactly it. You are finally getting the bill. It is the bill for the accumulated effects of sleep debt, work stress, years of sitting at a desk, inconsistent exercise, and, eating patterns that were simply easier to get away with a decade ago. The body at 40 is still highly adaptable, but it has lost that bulletproof leniency.
That makes total sense. But when people start feeling these receipts, the very first thing they blame is a broken metabolism. I mean, people will say, my metabolism just fell off a cliff.
That is the most common assumption. But the idea of a collapsed metabolism is actually one of the biggest myths about this stage of life. If you measure it, human metabolism is incredibly stable across adulthood.
Really? Completely stable?
Yes, daily energy expenditure tends to remain fairly steady from around age 20 all the way to age 60. Your internal engine does not just shut down or break.
That is completely counterintuitive. I mean, if the internal engine is not broken, what do you feel so utterly out of gas, and why is the weight suddenly sticking around? Are millions of people just hallucinating this?
Not at all. The changes are very real, but they are structural and behavioral, not a metabolic failure. Your resting energy expenditure is heavily dictated by, how much lean muscle tissue you carry.
Because muscle burns calories just by existing.
Right. Exactly. Muscle is highly metabolically active. But if you sit at a desk for 15 years, you experience a quiet, gradual loss of that muscle mass. At the same time, your subconscious daily movement drops. You fidget less, you take the elevator instead of the stairs, you sit longer. We call this non-exercise activity thermogenesis, or NEAT.
I see where you're going with this. When your muscle mass declines and your daily movement shrinks, your body simply requires significantly less fuel to run.
That is the exact mechanism. You are burning less energy throughout the day, not because of a broken metabolism, but because you literally have less metabolically active tissue and you move less.
It is like trying to run your current household on a budget from 10 years ago.
Yeah.
You weren't suddenly burning dramatically fewer calories overnight because a biological switch flipped. You were burning less because you naturally have less muscle, you sit way more, and frankly, you were just too exhausted to move as much as you used to.
That is a perfect analogy. You end up eating as if you still live in your younger, highly active body while physically living in a body that requires less energy. And that exhaustion you mentioned that is a massive piece of the puzzle because energy feels different now entirely due to changes in sleep architecture.
Sleep architecture. Tell me more about that. Because I feel like everyone I know in their 40s complains about waking up tired. It is not that they forgot how to sleep, but the rest just doesn't feel restorative anymore.
That is a brilliant way to phrase it, and it comes down to the physical structure of your sleep. As you move through this decade, your time spent in deep restorative sleep, which is the physical repair stage, actually decreases.
Oh, wow. So you are physically getting less of the good stuff.
Yes. Meanwhile, the time you spend in lighter sleep phases increases. So you might still be in bed for 8 hours, but your sleep is fundamentally shallower. You wake up more frequently.
And I imagine stress plays into that.
Heavily. Throw chronic stress, a late afternoon coffee, or a glass of wine into that picture. Alcohol, for instance, is notorious for completely destroying deep sleep. When you combine worse recovery with less everyday movement, low energy makes perfect biological sense. It is a compounding effect.
So it is the lifestyle compounding the biology. And while lifestyle explained a huge chunk of that energy drain, there is a fundamental biological reality running in the background here, which is hormones. And this is where the experience diverges wildly for men and women.
It is a completely different landscape. For women, the 40s are the decade when hormonal changes become impossible to ignore, primarily because perimenopause commonly begins.
And perimenopause is not a neat, steady drop in hormones, is it?
No, not at all. It is a messy, chaotic, deeply frustrating shift.
I want to unpack the biology of that chaos. Why is it so messy? What is actually happening?
It essentially comes down to a communication breakdown between the brain and the ovaries. The brain produces follicle-stimulating hormone, or FSH, which is basically a chemical signal shouting at the ovaries to produce an egg. But as a woman enters her 40s, the ovaries become less responsive to that signal.
So the brain is sending the message, but the ovaries are leaving it on read.
Exactly. And because the ovaries aren't responding, the brain just keeps turning up the volume. It pumps out more and more FSH. That massive surge triggers wild, unpredictable swings in estrogen.
So the brain is basically screaming through a megaphone, and the body is reacting with these massive hormonal spikes.
Yes. And because ovulation becomes irregular, progesterone, which relies on successful ovulation to be produced, drops and becomes highly unpredictable. This estrogen dominance and progesterone deficit completely destabilizes the body.
That sounds incredibly disruptive.
It is. Periods might become closer together than further apart, sometimes lighter, sometimes incredibly heavy. The fluctuating estrogen confuses the hypothalamus, which acts as the body's thermostat, triggering intense hot flushes and night sweats. And it can also cause vaginal dryness and disrupted sleep.
And I imagine this directly ties back into the weight gain issue we talked about earlier.
It absolutely does. Estrogen dictates where the body stores fat. When estrogen levels are robust, fat is typically stored around the hips and thighs. As estrogen drops and fluctuates during perimenopause, fat distribution actively shifts.
So it moves from the hips to the stomach.
That is exactly what happens. The body begins storing fat centrally around the abdomen as visceral fat. So a woman can weigh the exact same amount she did 5 years ago, but her body composition and shape are entirely different.
That is a biological roller coaster. But then you look at men and it seems like a totally different story. It doesn't look like a roller coaster at all.
No, for men, it is not a messy shift. It is a quiet fade. Men generally do not experience a sudden menopause-like cliff.
What do they experience instead?
Instead, testosterone tends to gradually decline, often starting around 40, at a rate of roughly 1% a year. At the same time, growth hormone and DHEA are dropping. DHEA is a precursor hormone. It is essentially the raw material the body uses to manufacture testosterone and other essential hormones.
I see. So the raw materials are drying up.
Exactly. When that raw material supply slowly dries up, everything else quietly downshifts.
Wait, I have to push back on this. If the male shift is that incredibly slow, just 1% a year, how does a guy in his 40s know if he is actually experiencing a hormonal shift or if he's just exhausted from a stressful job and a bad diet? I mean, how many men are out there right now, assuming they are just burnt out?
That is the tricky part, and it is why midlife in men can be so misleading. You are hitting on a major diagnostic blind spot. Men rarely go to the doctor and say, I believe my hormones are changing.
Right? They probably don't even think about it.
Exactly. Instead, they say, I have lost my drive, or I cannot build muscle no matter what I do, or I'm getting soft around the middle and I just feel low energy. The biological change in hormones is very real, but it is heavily amplified by sleep loss, stress, excess body fat, and inactivity.
So what you're saying is a man might blame his age when the root cause amplifying his symptoms is the fact that he has less muscle, terrible sleep, massive stress, and zero everyday movement.
That explains a lot of what we see. Not every tired man has a primary hormone disorder. Often, it is that exact combination of lifestyle factors suppressing whatever natural hormonal function he has left. And here's a fascinating detail. Fat tissue, specifically abdominal fat, contains an enzyme that actually converts testosterone into estrogen.
Wait, really? The fat itself is doing that?
Yes. So the heavier and more sedentary a man gets, the more his biology works against his testosterone levels.
That is wild. The fat becomes an active issue working against you. And because of these hormonal shifts, combined with those lifestyle deficits, the 40s are when people really start noticing a massive disconnect. I mean, there is a disconnect between the scale and the mirror, and an equally frustrating disconnect between the calendar and their brain.
Let's talk about the mirror first, because that shape shift is universally jarring. We talked about muscle mass and strength peaking in early adulthood. After that, they begin a very slow, silent decline if they are not actively trained.
And people usually miss this completely, don't they?
They absolutely do. You do not wake up suddenly weak. You just stop feeling naturally strong. The shopping bags feel a bit heavier. Getting off the floor takes a fraction of a second longer. Your posture slips faster because your stabilizing muscles are weaker.
And meanwhile, the visible aging accelerates. It is not just the waistline getting thicker. It is the skin and the structure underneath it.
Yes, the physical shifts happen everywhere. For women, estrogen is essentially a protector of collagen and bone. Collagen is the protein that gives skin its elasticity and structure. As estrogen drops, collagen production plummets.
Which leaves the skin thinner, I assume.
Thinner and much drier. Fine lines that used to only appear when you smiled begin to linger all day. And beneath the surface, bone density quietly begins to fall.
That sounds dangerous because you can't see it happening.
It is entirely silent. You do not feel your bones getting weaker until a fracture happens a decade later, which is why strength training is so critical.
Which is why you cannot ignore the physical maintenance. But as jarring as the wrinkles and the softer waistlines are, the cognitive realities are what really terrify people. I mean, the brain fog. You forget a password or lose your keys for the third time in a week, and the immediate assumption is early cognitive decline. People panic.
That panic is incredibly common, but usually it is completely unfounded. People think it is early dementia, but the brain just changes with age. Pure processing speed, the ability to rapidly absorb a totally new, abstract piece of information, may slow down by a fraction of a second.
So multitasking might feel significantly more draining.
Exactly. And finding that one specific word might take an extra beat. That is normal biology. But what people miss when they panic is that while pure speed drops, other areas of the brain actually improve.
That is the interesting part, what actually gets better.
Pattern recognition, judgment, emotional perspective, and the ability to connect complex ideas across completely different experiences. The myelin, the insulating sheath around your nerve fibers that allows complex signals to travel efficiently, actually peaks in many areas of the brain during midlife.
Oh, wow. I hadn't thought of it that way.
You lose a tiny bit of quickness, but you gain a massive amount of context. If a crisis happens at work, a 25-year-old might react faster, but the 45-year-old instantly recognizes the pattern from past experiences and knows exactly which 3 steps will actually solve it without making it worse.
That is a highly useful way to look at it.
Yeah.
It is like the brain isn't failing at all. It is just dealing with too many open tabs.
Too many open tabs, that is exactly it.
I mean, it is biology plus real-life overload. You are slower to remember a random password, not because your brain is fundamentally broken, but because your mental bandwidth is entirely consumed. You are managing a career, kids, aging parents, and that sleep debt we discussed, all at the exact same time.
That is exactly the mechanism at play. It is not pure cognitive decline. It is cognitive overload occurring right as your biological resilience is naturally dipping. Your brain is prioritizing complex problem solving over remembering where you put your sunglasses.
And that overload leads right into the next major hurdle. Because when faced with these softer middles, the lack of energy and this intense brain fog, people tend to panic. And when you panic, you try to fix yourself using the exact wrong methods.
This is where we see the most physical damage being done. I call it falling into the teenage logic trap.
The teenage logic trap. Tell me more about that.
You notice your clothes are tight, so you revert to what worked when you were 19. You drastically cut your calories to starve the fat away. You start doing endless amounts of punishing cardio, and you completely skip strength training because you think it will make you bulky.
I want to highlight the biology of why that is such a disaster. Because it is like trying to make a heavy car more fuel efficient by ripping out the engine. Yes, the car weighs less on the scale, but you have destroyed the exact machine that burns the fuel.
That analogy is flawless. By starving yourself and only running on a treadmill, you might temporarily drop the number on the scale, but your body strips away muscle tissue to make up for the energy deficit.
So you are burning away the exact metabolic engine you desperately need.
Exactly. You accelerate the root cause of the problem. You are actively making your resting energy expenditure lower.
It is basically punishing your body for changing.
It is. And another massive mistake is the comparison trap. You constantly compare your 40-year-old self strictly to your 27-year-old self. Emotionally, that makes sense, but biologically, it is a losing game. The goal at 40 is not to prove you can still live like a reckless 27-year-old.
Right. What is the actual goal then?
The goal is to build a highly resilient, well-supported version of the body you actually live in right now.
And part of building that resilience means you have to stop dismissing serious symptoms. Because people just accept misery as a natural part of aging, don't they?
They absolutely do. You experience severe persistent joint pain, completely fragmented sleep, heavy and painful periods, or major drops in mood, and you just wave it away saying, well, I am just getting older.
Which is a huge mistake.
Yeah, a terrible mistake. Some changes are normal physiological shifts, but severe pain and debilitating fatigue are highly treatable medical issues. Midlife is absolutely not a reason to stop advocating for your baseline health.
That is a crucial reminder. So if teenage logic and starvation diets are the mistakes, what are the actual mature fixes? How do we adapt our biology without turning our entire lives upside down?
The reassuring truth is that the fundamental basics still work. They just matter infinitely more now. You have to start with the non-negotiable toolkit, and the first tool is strength training. Doing regular muscle strengthening activity at least twice a week is biologically non-negotiable in midlife.
Because it protects the muscle mass we talked about earlier.
Yes, it forces your body to retain that metabolically active tissue, it strengthens your tendons, and the mechanical load literally forces your bones to retain their density. It is the single best investment you can make for your physical independence.
I completely agree. But I want to push back on the everyday movement aspect. You mentioned NEAT earlier. If I am doing heavy squats in the gym for an hour, why does it matter if I sit at a desk for the next 10 hours? Haven't I paid my physical toll for the day?
That is a very common misconception. A body that sits completely still for 10 hours ages fundamentally differently from a body that moves frequently, regardless of that one gym session.
Really? How so?
Prolonged sitting signals to your body that it does not need to manage blood sugar efficiently. It causes the fascia, which is the connective tissue around your muscles, to stiffen. Daily walking and consistent everyday movement maintain your joint mobility and keep your baseline energy expenditure up. The gym builds the armor, but everyday movement keeps the joints oiled.
That clears up a lot of confusion.
Yeah.
And obviously the fuel you put into that engine matters. What is the shift in nutrition?
It is entirely about adequate protein and whole foods. Aging bodies actually experience something called anabolic resistance. That means it takes a slightly stronger protein signal to trigger the same amount of muscle synthesis that you got easily in your 20s.
So the small salads aren't going to cut it anymore.
Exactly. You have to stop underfeeding your muscles with tiny salads and stop overfeeding your fat cells with highly processed convenience foods. You need regular protein-dense meals that supply the actual amino acids your body needs to repair itself.
That makes a lot of sense. And I imagine sleep has to move up the priority list to support all of this repair.
Sleep requires a major promotion. It has to move from being a nice-to-have luxury to a strictly non-negotiable health tool. Better sleep regulates your cortisol, clears metabolic waste from your brain, and dictates your insulin sensitivity for the entire next day.
And for women in perimenopause, that must be even more critical.
It is essential. Aggressively supporting sleep hygiene is crucial because the hormonal fluctuations are actively trying to fragment your rest.
Okay, I have to ask about stress, because it feels like a buzzword. Everyone is stressed. Why is it so biologically destructive now?
Because you have to start treating stress as a profound physical condition, not just an emotional mood. When stress is chronically high, your body pumps out cortisol.
And cortisol is the fight-or-flight hormone.
Yes. Its primary job is to pull stored energy into your bloodstream to fight a physical threat. But if the threat is just a work email, you don't burn that energy. High cortisol prevents you from dropping into deep sleep, it breaks down muscle tissue for quick fuel, and it drives intense cravings for sugar and fat. Managing stress is no longer a luxury spa day, it is literal body maintenance.
You have to find a way to signal safety to your nervous system. Okay, wait, does this mean your 40s demand absolutely perfect discipline? Because honestly, for someone already dealing with the cognitive overload of, like you said, raising kids, managing a career, and paying a mortgage, having to perfectly manage protein, sleep architecture, cortisol levels, and strength training sounds utterly exhausting.
That is a very valid concern, and the answer is absolutely not. It does not demand perfection. Midlife does not require punishing intensity. What it actually rewards is consistency.
Consistency over intensity. I like that.
You do not need to do the most intense, grueling workout every single day. You just need to show up and do the basics consistently. Eating enough protein most days, walking most days, protecting your sleep most nights. Consistency always beats exhausting, short-lived intensity.
That is a huge relief. It takes the pressure off while keeping the focus entirely on what actually drives biological change. When we lay the science out like this, entering your 40s actually sounds like a profound gift, even if it is a deeply uncomfortable one at times.
Yeah.
Your body is just no longer hiding the truth from you.
That is the most useful way to look at it. What happens at 40 is not a biological betrayal. It is clear, actionable feedback. Your body is finally telling you exactly what it needs to function. It tells you when you need more recovery, when your stress is completely out of control, and when you can no longer outwork a bad diet.
So the next time you feel like your body's betraying you, you have to ask yourself, is it really a betrayal? Or is it just the very first time your body is setting firm boundaries with you? Think about that as you go into your week. If you listen to that feedback now, you build incredible momentum for the future. You protect the muscle before it is gone, and you sort out your sleep before exhaustion becomes your entire personality.
Exactly. You stop fighting the biological changes and start actively working with the body you have today.
And this is usually where things start to shift more noticeably. Oh, actually, let me rephrase that. This is where things really take shape, and it becomes even clearer as you move into your 50s. Thanks for listening to TalkKast.